Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us for another episode of the Jane Irrigation training series. I'm Richard Restuccia, Director of Water Management Solutions for Jane Irrigation, and I'm really excited to be talking about the Farm Bill and the impact on agricultural production today. And I'll tell you why. And we see that this Farm Bill comes through every 5 years. People think, or people know, it really sets the strategic direction for agriculture in the US. There's a lot of opportunity in the Farm Bill for growers to take advantage of, to make themselves more profitable, or maybe get some help. A lot of help for young farmers, veteran farmers, a lot of help for technology. And what's really important to me is the help for conservation as well. So this is all in this Farm Bill, but I think also lots of times people don't take the time to understand it. They don't fully realize what's available to them. And I think oftentimes some of the advantages go to waste. So today we're very lucky because we've got Michael Pippen, who, for those of you who've seen Michael, he does a great job on these presentations. He's the Director of Business Development at Jane Irrigation. But in Michael's prior life or previous life, he's also worked for dealers in farm country. He grew up in agriculture. He does a really good job with growers and helping growers. It's just been a part of his life. And part of his responsibility as a dealer was helping growers access or secure Farm Bill funding for what they wanted to do on their farms. So that, and he's got experience through the Irrigation Association on this as well. So it's a great practical combination that you don't find too often. So anyway, Michael, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I appreciate the introduction as always, Richard. We have had the opportunity to do a couple of these webinars, and we always have a good time and hopefully learn something along the way. And then today we're going to try to tackle a pretty large subject, but really by taking it a little piece at a time. Today we're going to talk about the Farm Bill, or what the piece of federal legislation that we refer to as the Farm Bill. We're going to talk a little bit about what it looks like today, and then we're going to back up a little bit and kind of see how we got to where we're going to be, where we're at today, and why you should be interested in this piece of legislation. What we're going to try not to do is really get into any kind of political flashpoints, which is a little bit challenging when you're talking about any type of legislation, to not get into the political debates. But we're going to kind of skirt the edge of it. We're really not going to voice any kind of opinions on right or wrong, or how it should be done. We're going to present it in a manner of what it is, right, where it is right now. And hopefully from that, we can kind of open up some dialogue about how this Farm Bill can be used as a tool, no different than any of the other tools that you have access to as a producer or as an industry person like myself in the irrigation industry. We're going to talk a little bit more specifically about two programs that you may have already heard of or been aware of. I'm going to talk about the CRP program and the EQIP program. So those little teaser about kind of where we're going to end and spend some detail. And I hope at the very end of it, we give you some practical ways that you can go about influencing this policy, not only using it as a tool now, but influencing the policy going forward.
Love that part of it, Michael, because oftentimes I tend to sit back, have opinions, but not really do my part in doing something about it. So I'm really excited that that you're including that part, right? Because this is maybe the most important part, is how as we as people in ag can impact this, and especially because we're the people, and I don't necessarily mean you and me, but everybody who's watching are the ones who can benefit, who are impacted by this the most. So I'm really anxious for that part.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The consumption part of the legislation is just one piece of it, right? I mean, when you really start encompassing, the giving back and giving opinion and being able to influence that's where, that's really where our government works at its finest, right? When the people are being able to voice that and make those changes that they need, right? The legislation is for us, right? And I think that's a great point to bring out at this point. because this on the screen is what the Farm Bill is today. It is a big bill. It is about 529 pages of legislation. It is what we call an omnibus bill. That basically means there's a lot of stuff in it. It is not narrowly focused. It is broadly focused, and there's an intentionality behind that. We'll get into that in a little while. But all this information that I'm going to present to you today, I want to make sure we know where it comes from. Most of this comes from the NRCS, USDA websites. You can find a lot of this information. There's a never-ending rabbit hole of information that you can read on this. But some of this data and some of the ideas that I'm presenting, a lot of it came from the Congressional Research Service, which is an interesting organization. They are funded by Congress, and they actually call themselves the Congress's think tank, right? They create these research documents, nonpartisan, I guess is the best way to say it, to where they can kind of summarize these bills and legislation and give it to the Congress people so they can understand what the purpose is for these bills. And then the other part of it is the Congressional Budget Office, and they're the ones that kind of set these numbers. So there's a couple of groups that are nonpartisan that help Congress people decide, how much is this going to cost? What is its intention? What's it going to do? And that's where most of this information comes from. But the bill itself has 12 titles or sections or chapters, if you will. Commodities is one of them: conservation, trade, nutrition, credit, rural development, research extension, forestry, energy, horticulture, crop insurance, and miscellaneous. And the total budget, as this was presented in 2018, was $429 billion. Now, the technical name for this bill, this Farm Bill, will change every one. This bill comes up every 5 years, and sometimes the technical name changes slightly. Its current bill's name is the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018. It actually was voted into law at the end of 2018, kind of took action in 2019. So we're currently in a 2018 Farm Bill that's active from 2019 to 2023. I couldn't imagine how we're confused on what's going on, right? Even the title is kind of hard to figure out what's going on. But you can see here in the graph on the right where a majority of the money is allocated to. Now, these $428 billion just represent the mandated outlays. These are just the programs that have money set aside for them currently, or when the legislation was put into vote. There are other non-mandatory outlays or programs that don't have money appropriated to them. So the program has been authorized. The idea has been approved, but there's really not any money for it. And so they have to kind of go get that money or get appropriated from different committees or whatever, however that process works further into the bill. So this is just kind of the guaranteed amount that we're going to spend. And over 3/4 of it is in the nutrition title or category, if you will. And then you can see crop insurance, commodities, and conservation follow in a very distant second, third, and fourth, and then other is all the other categories. So about 99% of the funding fall within those four primary categories or chapters, if you will, and we negotiate this as a Congress every 5 years. So we've got a couple more years to go on this current Farm Bill. So how do we get to a $428 billion piece of legislation with all these big categories and kind of some confusing time frame? And really, we're going to move pretty quickly through this because obviously there's a lot to unpack here, but this bill is almost 100 years old. It really started after the Great Depression or during the Great Depression, where commodity prices were very suppressed, very low. And really the only way that our farmers could survive was to produce on more land. Was to get more acres and plant more crops, which further increased supply, pushed down the price even further, and also was not that great for the environment. About this time in the 30s is when we had the Dust Bowl in the central part of the U.S., where we were just plowing up too many fields in reality. At the time, I don't think we really understood all that, but now we have a much better understanding of how production and the environment, conservation have to move at the same pace. The real theme of these farm bills, you can see them moving down through the years here. Obviously the names are changing, but we kind of call these, at the time they wouldn't have called them farm bills, but The point was really that we understood at this point in time, if you remember, we got World War I, World War II, all these things. World War II hadn't happened yet, but World War I, the food crisis that they were having in Europe and some of these areas, we understood how important it was to secure our own food source and without ruining everything else in the balance, right? And so at this point, this farm bill really was revolved around paying farmers to not plant too many acres, right? So if you had a 100-acre farm, the government may give you, ask to take 20% of it out of production. You farm the 80% and we'll subsidize you for the 20%. And some of that has gotten a bad, connotation over the years, but that's essentially the infancy of it. And also they would buy surplus commodities in the high yielding years, right? To kind of balance out this market a little bit. So you didn't have huge years where the price plummeted and then drought years where there was no production, the price went up, but nobody had anything to sell. Try to manage out the market to where it was a little more consistent. And there was some varying degrees of success in there. It didn't always work like we wanted it to. No legislation is perfect, but that's really the infancy of the program. The really next big jumping off point, I would say, would be in the 1960s and 70s when the Food Stamp Act of 1964 came into play. And this was, again, a piece of legislation that was put forward to allow access to what is worldwide known currently as the lowest cost food production country in the world. Really, our food is inexpensive, right? And we need to everybody should have access to that, especially impoverished peoples and rural and urban. And this Food Stamp Act was aimed at that, of allowing impoverished families to have access to our low cost foods. This is when it all starts rolling into this ominous bill where you've got kind of this big nutrition piece, which is what we call SNAP now, the SNAP program, food stamp program. Nutrition piece is majority of that program. And then the other farming pieces go along with it, right? This is where, and the conservation piece is where the EQIP program fits, is where the CRP program that we're going to talk about, that's where all that fits in there. And so you may ask the question, and I think this is this is where we'll skirt the political, the political flashing point is, why in the world would you do that? And really, there's a lot of reasons why, and I don't know, I don't know how to properly explain them all. But one big reason was that we as a rural citizen of the farm, we needed broader support on this bill if we were really going to do the conservation and the production programs that we wanted to do. If you think about just where the amount of people live and where the number of representatives in Congress live, we don't have the population, so we don't have as many of, as much representation, just literally not as many people. So by bringing in the nutrition piece, which was at the time perceived as a very urban type of a program, that's not necessarily true, but at the time it was perceived that way. Now we had a nationwide bill where rural and urban had some skin in the game. And at the idealistic level, it also gave us at a rural constituency a way to show, hey, the box of cereal you're buying for a couple of bucks, the only way that I can make that cereal for you in a sustainable and profitable way, because I got to have sustainability in the environment and I got to make some money, is we need this part of the program as well, right? We need part of it. And then the urban part needs that for the food stamp side. Now, again, that's a little, skirting the political side of that, that food stamps are not just for urban people, right? That's not the case at all. But it did give us a chance, I think, at the rural level to explain and make that connection between this is where your food comes from. And you see a lot of that in our policies today. It's foreign for me, who grew up on a farm, to not understand where our food comes from. But if you never were on a farm and you lived in a large city your whole life, that's not, no different. I have no idea how the subway works, right? And so, and they would think that's silly. And so it's not uncommon for us to say, this is where our food comes from, is required to do it at a reasonable cost. So those things combined is really what was a catalyst to bring these two what seemed kind of foreign ideals together. That's probably enough or too much on the history right there of that.
Yeah.
But I think that's important to understand how we got to the size bill that we're in.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, Michael, how and when does irrigation come into this?
Right. And this is kind of where we're at now, is that really in the 1980s is really where the first program I'm going to talk a little bit about hit. And 1985, the CRP program came into effect. And CRP program is a conservation research program. So this slide here is really our after the 70s, this is really what the kind of the modern age of the Farm Bill looks like. And in 1996, in the irrigation industry, I think the EQIP program will be the one that we're most familiar with. So these are relatively new programs within the conservation portion that we're going to see. And then, of course, now we're into 2018 at the bottom there, and we will have another Farm Bill debate starting pretty soon, actually. To revisit the funding very quickly, you can see the nutrition's at the top with a vast majority of the expenditures. If you look kind of the second level there with selected agriculture titles, the farm commodities is really a kind of a farm payout type of a program. That's pretty hotly debated. The crop insurance has been pretty steady in their funding for the last 3 farm bills. And that's been a pretty popular program. And I think a lot of people would actually like to see crop insurance, the protection of crops, expanded beyond some of the commodities. And so that's been a really nice program that I think a lot of people would like to be expanded. And then you'll see kind of here this conservation piece has stayed pretty even at 8, 6, 7% over the last 3 farm bills. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is 2 programs within that farm bill and how they're used on the farm and how you can use them. The first program that I want to talk about is the CRP program, the Conservation Reserve Program. The Conservation Reserve Program is one of the larger programs within the conservation piece. And I want to make sure I get these. I think this is important to make sure I get this kind of directly out of the bill. So I'm going to read this really. Title 2 description is which is the conservation title. It says assistance to ag producers by addressing environmental resource concerns in private land through land retirement, conservation easement, working land assistance, and partnership opportunities. So these conservation programs are not just designed to conserve our natural resources. They are designed to work within the farm to make it a sustainable, profitable piece of a farming operation. So the CRP falls within this land retirement program. And if you'll notice, this is our farm in Louisiana. Mississippi River levee is on the right side of the page. The Mississippi River is about a mile to the east of this. If you see these large trees here, this was the original property line for this farm. And it kind of meanders through here because that's an old bayou that still drains the property. And these are old virgin timber that's never been cut. But you can see these smaller trees kind of in this little divot right here, and this area and the bottom right, and even this little area in the corner. We used to farm that, believe it or not. These are little corners. Both of these fields are our fields. And as mechanization got larger, equipment got larger, we got faster planting windows got tighter. This is profitable land to grow crops on, but it's not very efficient, right? I mean, all you do in this divot right here is turn around and turn rows, and you're getting weed encroachment from the trees, and you're hitting your equipment on the tree limbs and all this kind of stuff, right? It's just not efficient to grow. And so in the early 2000s, we applied for the CRP program, in which we would make an application. There's all these checklists, and depending on how many checks you get in there, it prioritizes your funding. We were paid through the EQIP program, which is part of Title II in the Farm Bill, to plant trees and to bring this productive land out of production and encourage and introduce it back into its natural state. We planted native hardwoods through here. They paid for the trees. They paid for the planting of them. And in turn, we signed a contract to keep it out of production for 20 years. These CRP programs are very different. These was one of the earlier ones, which probably was a little bit more profitable and gave us a little bit more flexibility. Some of the later ones were a little bit narrower. But what's really interesting on this property is that, yes, we could have potentially have made more by growing soybeans or corn or cotton on this land. But the payments were such that it was a guaranteed income. It was land that was hard to farm. It wasn't necessarily unprofitable to farm, but it was inefficient. And as this program started maturing, we were able to actually re-sign another, or we're about to re-sign another CRP program initiative where we're going into these trees that are now 20, 25, approaching 25 years old, and we're going to go thin them, not cut them down and take them out of, put it back and plant soybeans again. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to come in, we're going to take another government program subsidy. We're going to cut the trees down in the middle, thin it out, allow the undergrowth, and really start returning this back to its natural state or as close as that we can come. And so we've done this in several pieces of property that we have. We've done it in a large area that wasn't that profitable to grow. So we've done quite a bit of this, returning some of this land back to its natural habitat on our farm, and it's been very successful for us.
So Michael, we've got a couple questions now. This is very interesting. So one thing that struck one of our viewers was, the wording in that Title II is very broad, right? It allows for partnership. Is this really an opportunity for growers to say, I think I know of a way here where I can add to conservation, and they make the application accordingly?
Yeah, there's a lot that's underneath these programs. I'm not as familiar with the area that talks about partnership opportunities. I'm not exactly sure what they mean by that. I have not seen a program specifically for that. But I have seen, resource concerns. So like one of them with groundwater that we even see in our farm here was, pulling water from certain aquifers when we have shallow kind of, I don't know, you want to call it, not aquifer water, right? We have shallow water because of the river, how close it is, and changing over some of those wells from either that fed like cattle, changing those wells over from either a municipal, which is treated water, that would be for us drinking, or pulling out of a deep well into an alternative water source. So I've seen a little bit of that. I don't know exactly what the partnership opportunity would look like. I'm not familiar with that piece of it.
Yeah. And then, Michael, how hard is it to apply for these programs? I mean, is it a 1-pager? Is it a 10-pager? Is it essay, fill it out? What's that look like?
It can be pretty intense depending on the type of program. These type of programs like the CRP are relatively straightforward. It's going to be because you're not really designing much. There's not really a system in place. When we look at the EQIP, I'll talk a little bit more in detail on that. That's going to be more complicated in a lot of ways. There's also a lot more money involved there. But in this CRP is pretty straightforward. Where you move up the priority list to get the funding is kind of what it looked like in the natural state. If we were to move over to an area that did not have a wetland, like if this bayou wasn't running through it, then we would have been a lower priority if it was naturally not covered with hardwoods at some point. But this property here was at one time covered with hardwood trees from one end to the other. And so that raised our priority because we could return it to a natural state relatively easy and had kind of, some areas to piggyback off of, if you will. It wasn't just 5 acres out in the middle of a desert, right? It was part of a larger program.
Yeah. And then are there people from the government that are out looking for opportunities for growers, or is this something the grower just determines that it would be a good opportunity and they enact it?
I would say both. I would encourage you to be proactive. We'll speak a little bit to this at the end. What I say take away and what to do with it. I would encourage you to be proactive because the money comes from the federal government. It's sent down to the state level, and then it's sent down to the regional level. And the states and the regions could and most likely do have priorities where they're focusing their efforts. It's simply it's hard to tackle every problem at one time unless you just have a completely blank check, and they do not have a completely blank check. They have funding limitations. So what you're looking for may not be a high priority, and so they may not be actively going out and looking for people to enlist. However, that doesn't mean they can't fund anything that they want to fund. So if you have a project that's outside the priority list, probably going to take you a little bit more effort to find somebody that has the expertise to execute the program and to get the support to do it. but oftentimes that can happen towards the end of the bill, right? So they have a priority number one and they fund all that, then they go 2, 3, and by the time they get to the end of the farm bill, they've used up their highest priority. They go, oh, hey, I have some money left. Then they might start broadening their applications and trying to find things to use that allocated money.
Yeah, interesting. And then we have one comment from our friend John Farner at the Irrigation Association. And he mentions that the EQIP program encourages partnerships between the grower, the NRCS, and conservation organizations. So thanks, John, for that comment. That very, very much helps.
Yeah, it does. Thanks, John, for the comment about the partnership opportunities and what they would like to look like. And I think most of us in the irrigation industry would be most familiar with the EQIP program, the Environmental Quality Initiative programs. And primarily for me, where I've seen this program used the most is in the Central Plains, installing subsurface drip irrigation systems. I will take a step back from that and say, what is this program? What is this EQIP funding? What is it designed to do? In a very broad sense, what we're trying to do, or what the bill is trying to do, is send funding to the farm level to add efficiencies, to preserve our natural resources without sacrificing the profitability of the farm, right? I think that is about as simple as I think I can state it. And there's a lot of things within this EQIP program that can get funded. And we alluded to some of that already, that in this Central Plains area of Texas and Oklahoma and some of the corn ground up in Kansas and Nebraska, their number one priority is protecting their groundwater. That is number one, priority one. And so most of the EQIP funding goes towards that. And what could that look like in a farming operation? A lot of times it looks like the retrofit of an old irrigation system to something that's much more efficient. Now, that could be a center pivot being converted to subsurface drip. It could be a center pivot that changes nozzles out to something that doesn't use near as much energy or even less water. It could look like a standard off-on your pump changed over to a variable speed drive, so it matches the engine energy requirement, matches exactly what the system needs and doesn't draw too much energy. It could look like an old diesel pump from 30 years ago, or diesel engine driving a pump, converting that to an electric motor, something like. I mean, there's a lot of things that go in here. Weather stations, soil moisture monitoring systems that allow you to accurately apply the right amount of water without overwatering. All these things and many, many more fall under this EQIP program. And as a drip irrigation manufacturer, we work very closely in the Central Plains, High Plains area, helping our dealers design low volume subsurface drip irrigation systems, low energy, to help conserve these natural resources. The EQIP program helps cost share a majority of the systems that we're working on, because it is a large initial expense. But we've seen the data on how we can preserve the water, the groundwater, and we've also seen the data that proves that we can maintain yields and profitability. And so this has been a very, very successful program for the central part of the United States, and hopefully over time we're going to see the environmental piece continue to follow along with it, where we're really conserving and managing our groundwater resources, which obviously, again, kind of what we alluded to originally, these things have to move together. If they don't move together, we can grow all the cotton in the world the next 3 years, but if we run out of water, that's pointless. The same side is we have to keep production and profitability up, so that we don't, you don't just turn on a cotton farm tomorrow. If you've never farmed, we cannot lose that knowledge and that experience base that we have. So these things have to move together, and the EQIP program has allowed that to happen. I will say that it broadens past that. You know, it could go into I've seen EQIP funding, cost share, high tunnels for small producers and low income areas. I've seen it give out monies to minorities and impoverished areas to help them, improve all kinds of things in the farm and add value and profitability to those farms. A lot of off-season things, high tunnels, pump rebuilds, try to lower their cost and extend their growing season. So there's a lot to unpack within this EQIP program. But I think this this probably program here probably has the most direct impact on our irrigation industry of any other programs within the bill.
Can I apply year round? Is there a certain time that I apply before the season starts? How's all that work?
Yeah, it can get a little complicated, and there is a certain time you can basically apply anytime. But in a normal year, which I don't know that we've had a normal year in a while, but in a normal year, there's a deadline to apply. That's traditionally kind of in the late spring. You get your application in, and once you get your application in, they prioritize them, and then you get your funding later on in the fall to where that you could start your, in most markets where you could start your construction on your project in the winter and spring before the planting season. That's the ideal situation. That did not happen at all last year. It was kind of a mess, and it can be, right. This is a piece of legislation that's not always clean. You have to kind of roll with the punches. You do have to be very patient. The process in some areas is pretty well oiled. They've done it a lot. But if you're going for a program that is not super common, I would say prepare to do a little bit of homework on your own. But really, I'd say the jumping off point, Richard, of where to get started. And if you say, hey, this looks great, like I would encourage you as a producer or as an industry professional to reach out to your industry legislative representative, like John Farner here that made our comment earlier. Like if I have a question about the farm bill, like I'm calling him first because he may not know how every little application or every place prioritizes, but he is going to know what type of programs are being supported by your industry, right? He's going to be aware of this EQIP program and the type of projects that they have funded, right? So, those people, those industry representatives can kind of get you in the right direction to say, hey, this is happening out there, or this is not happening. That is not part of this type of a bill. And they can help direct you that way to kind of get your, is this something that may work for me? And then would also encourage you to reach out and tell your story to your Congress representative. They like to hear stories. They want to understand what your roadblocks are, what your struggles are, what you need assistance in. Therefore, when they see these bills or these opportunities to come around, they can have they can tie a story to a piece of legislation, and they can voice those concerns, or they can dig deeper into them and provide some input on the legislation itself when it comes up to vote or debate. And then I'd also encourage you, to go down to your local NRCS USDA office. NRCS does the EQIP allocation. I think they're the office that you would really want to go to for the EQIP funding and the CRP program specifically. But they'll be able to help you with the prioritization, right? I think that's important to recognize that, what type of programs they're prioritizing. And I would encourage you as a producer to follow kind of the priorities. Just because it's not your program, but they're trying to fund a drainage project and you're really looking for an irrigation project, don't snub your nose at that drainage project, right? See if that fits. These programs, we as taxpayers pay for them, and they're for the farmers to secure our food source. We need those resources allocated properly, and the farmer is really the one that's going to be most appropriate, the grower, to know how those funds are going to work best for him. It's no different than an infrastructure bill that builds roads, or a defense bill that protects us with our military. This bill is drafted and funded to support our producers. Our producers need to tell us how to spend that money appropriately. They're the ones that are going to know how to do it. It's for you. So don't get kind of caught in this. That's not what I'm really wanting to do right now. Look at where the priorities are. Let's hope that those priorities align with what you want to do. But if not, think through that process and say, okay, well, maybe what they're trying to fund right now, what they're trying to do priority, maybe I do have a place for that on my farm. And what would that look like? So I'd encourage, that's kind of the 3 steps that I'd say to take to kind of, what you can do with take away with some of this information.
I think that's a great advice, right? These are the people you should develop really good, strong relationships with, right? This is, they're only going to help.
That's right. That's right. And so, that's really kind of concludes what I wanted to visit about today. Richard, I mean, my contact information is there. I'm by no means an expert on all the intricacies of the Farm Bill, but I have been around it quite a bit. I do know quite a few resources or people that I could point you towards if you have any questions. So, definitely reach out to me or somebody. If you want to reach out to Richard, we can get that contact information to you. We'll try to answer any questions we can, and at the very least, put you in touch with somebody that may can answer it for you.
Yeah, Michael, thanks so much. That was really interesting, very informative. And I know that you really planted quite a few seeds today. We had quite a good audience today, and I can tell when these subjects are going to be popular. When we do the invitations, and we get a lot of people right from the start, and we definitely saw that today. And so I know people were interested. I know they left here today or will leave here today with good ideas of what to do going forward. So thank you for that help with that. I really appreciate it. And to all the viewers out there today, thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking time to visit with us and have this conversation. So we appreciate that. And next week, we're going to be talking about smart controllers on Wednesday. And then on Friday, this year's World Ag Conference is going to be virtual. So I've got a couple of people from World Ag that are going to be on next Friday talking about the virtual conference, and more importantly, explaining how you can take advantage of all there is that's going to be offered. So good week next week. Thanks again, Michael. Great job today. And we will see you all later. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Richard.